Hello, welcome to this annotation video. We're working our way through the conflict poetry section of the anthology from OCR, Towards a World Unknown. This poem, There's a Certain Slant of Light, I believe is the fifth poem in this series. So we're moving forward and we're getting increasingly more modern as we're going. Emily Dickinson would have read lots of the romantic poetry that we've been studying. And it's worth saying a few things about the poet Emily Dickinson herself before we continue. So let's go down to the bottom. And you'll see here how I divided up my page, because we've got two poems on the same page the first time this has happened. So I've put the story and the message at the top. Normally I put tone and message, but the story is going to be quite important here. So I've split that down and I've just boxed off the poem The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy. We'll come to that next lesson. But I'm going to start down here with Emily Dickinson at the bottom, because she is a really, really interesting character. I studied her poetry for A-level and I really enjoyed reading it, but it's hard work. You have to think about it for quite a long time. So she lacked fame in life. She tried to get some of her poems published. She wrote to an editor, someone in America. She's an American poet. Let's write that down as well. American poet living on the East Coast in a town called Amherst in Massachusetts. Her father had a professional job, he was a lawyer, and she was a very intelligent woman. But she lacked fame in life simply because female poets were not really taken too seriously. When she did write to a publisher, they kind of sent her poems back and said, you need to sort this out, it doesn't really make much sense. And so in that sense, she's kind of a bit of ahead of her time. And in that ways, it made her quite a recluse. She was quite reclusive. She didn't really go out much, she didn't really spend time with other people apart from her family. She did have a fiance, but he died. She did have some friends, but they died. And her family basically just lived quite a reclusive life, and she never married. A lot of her poems are about death. That's one thing that I will say, because I don't really think that this is the best poem that she's written. It's not my favourite poem, but she seems to think about and write about death all the time, focusing so heavily on this idea of death. She thinks about the moment of death. She has a clear anxiety about this. She thinks about funerals. She writes about funerals. She thinks about almost dying, but then not quite dying. These are going to kind of come and be relevant as we look through this poem. But this idea of death and just being completely obsessed with this idea of death is quite a modernist sort of interpretation. She also, and I want you to write this quotation down if you have space at the bottom here, because she wasn't very religious. Her family was religious, but she didn't count herself as being one of those religious people. And this is what she said in a letter about herself. They are all religious. Talking about her family, I think she had a brother and a sister, mum and a dad. They are all religious except me. I'm going to leave the quotation there because I don't want to take up all our space, but she says they are all religious except me, and address each morning an eclipse as father. So she's talking about how they pray every morning, but she didn't seem to identify with their religion, and perhaps we can identify with that a little bit as well. What else can we say about this character? Well, she was a strong female voice. She has a strong voice in her poems, and they are, as I said, quite ahead of their time. And in that way, she's a little bit rebellious as well, in terms of the religion that she rejected. So this poem hasn't been edited. So the poem that OCR have chosen to give you, there we go, we can see it all on the page. You can tell an Emily Dickinson poem a mile off just by looking at it. What do I mean by that? Well, look at all the dashes all the way down. She's been criticised for this. She's been criticised for structuring and punctuating like this. Let's jot this down as well. Punctuation may seem a bit random, and there was a famous editor who collated a lot of her poems together, James Reeves I think his name was, and he dismissed her punctuation. He got all the poems and then he just cut all the punctuation out, or rather he kind of refined the punctuation. He took all of these dashes out, and interestingly a lot of these poems about death end with this dash rather than a full stop, and I'm really glad the exam board have chosen to leave them in. I think they are just sort of so idiosyncratic. Emily Dickinson, they really do just tell me that this is one of her poems, and they should be in. That, you know, she wrote them, why not leave them in? Okay, so there's a little bit of background about the writer. This poem is going to be a difficult one. It does not conform to one interpretation. So you can't, unlike the poem that we looked at last time, The Destruction of Sennacherib, where you can say, and you can point to a moment, you can say, this poem is about this thing. You can't say that with this poem. It's about lots of different things, to be honest, and we're going to just explore a range of suggestions, and then you can make your own mind up. But we'll start with what kind of conflict is going on here. Well, there's definitely and clearly some religious conflict going on. There's also some inner conflict, and I think this inner conflict is probably a little bit more tricky to work out, but it's certainly there. So there's some religious conflict, there's some inner conflict here as well. What else can we say about the poem? Well, it's in lyrical form. As you can see, the stanzas are quite contained. 4 quatrains, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's in quatrains and there's 4 of them. Let's write that down. So it looks a little bit like a song on a page. And we've got a alternate rhyme scheme. It's not quite alternate, it's lines 2 and 4 that rhyme all the way down. 1 and 3 are just sort of like random, they're not particularly rhyming. So we've got a bit of a regular rhyme scheme. These things I like to put at the top because they connect to the whole poem. And yep, so I think we probably got all of our main things that we can just notice straight away. I'm going to look at the title now. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just looking at the title, and I don't want this video to last too long, but there's quite a lot that we can say about this poem. Again, you're going to make your own mind up about this. It draws my eye to this idea of light. Okay, what kind of light does she mean? She could mean understanding. Okay, light, shedding light on something. Okay, if you've been given light about something, then maybe you have a clear understanding. Does it mean lightness? As in like a lightness of heart or a lightness of mind? I'm going to put question marks because actually it's not clear. Does light kind of bring clarity of thought? Or could it mean something about, let's put it up here, could it mean that moment of death? You know, in cartoons they say, don't go towards the light, okay? It's that idea of going towards the light maybe being like the afterlife, maybe heaven. We knew she wasn't very religious, but she is obsessed with this idea of death and what comes after death. There is a certain slant of light. Again, is she thinking this idea of certain, does that link to this idea of clarity? Does that link to an idea of coherence? Is she asking herself questions about understanding life, meanings in life? Possibly. And this idea of the word slant, I think is really interesting, because there's not a certain beam of light. There's not a certain dazzling light. It's a slant of light. And I think this is really important to get your head around, because she is making the point that a slant of light conceals some things but reveals others. Some things are revealed in a slant of light. Okay, if you imagine all around is dark and you just have one beam of light, you can see a little bit, okay? And I want to know, is it something to do with this? Is it something to do with concealing things and revealing other things? Okay. Well, we're going to read the poem through, and we're going to just highlight and annotate any sort of strange and tricky words, but you will see that the story is not straightforward. She uses words that you know, but in a strange order, okay? And there's a reason for that, and we'll have a think about it in a minute. Let's go for it. Line 1. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it, any. 'Tis the seal despair, an imperial affliction, centres of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance, on the look of death. First thing to say, heft is a strange word, and it just means weight. But it would have been quite a colloquial word, okay? Heft. There's nothing else that I can really see here that is beginning to cause an initial problem. Imperial, kingly, like a ruler, like an emperor, like a king, like a queen. Imperial, affliction, suffering. I don't want to take up all of my room just identifying these words, because there's a lot more that we can find that is much more exciting about this poem. So she's also got these bizarre capitals all the way through. If I was her teacher, I'd be highlighting, I'd be circling these things and saying, well, why have you got capital letters all the way through? Well, that is another stylistic technique that she has. And I mentioned earlier, I said, look, you know, she uses these straightforward words, but the sentences are not straightforward. The sentences are very convoluted, and sometimes they're quite reductive as well. That's a word that I think we need to write down, because she's known for her reductionism. Where can we fit this in now? I'm going to fit it in here. Poetry. This is a really good word to use with Emily Dickinson. Her poetry is very reductive. That means that she doesn't waste words. She doesn't say the same thing 10 times when she could just say it once with a few words. She almost like boils it down, like it's been boiled right down, and it's really, really intense. That's the kind of style she's going for. Okay, so do we understand what's going on here? A lot of people say, and we'll just jot down a few ideas up here under our heading of what is the story? What could the story be? Again, a question mark, because we don't really know. This could be there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. She could be sitting in church here, looking out of the window on a cold winter's morning, and she sees a slant of light going through the trees, and it makes her think about some kind of inner mental oppression that she's having. It makes her, maybe even it's like this idea that she's being oppressed by religion, because she's struggling to work out what these meanings are, and it's not really making sense to her, because she's got some kind of internal conflict about that. Maybe that's what she's saying. None may teach it any. Now, why are people trying to teach me these meanings? They're my internal, it's my internal conversation with myself to work out what these meanings of life are. And this idea then about the imperial affliction, the king, maybe she could be referring to God, is almost causing her suffering here. And this part also chimes in with that reading, centres of the air. Someone in heaven is sending down these messages but it's not causing her joy, it's causing her suffering. Okay? When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So she's saying it's all very well. We all listen when people are preaching in church, and we're like shadows. We're all sort of holding our breath to hear what you've got to say. But then when it's over, we just sort of drift away into the darkness, and that makes me think of death. All right, that is one reading of this poem. I went through that very quickly. You can listen to it again if you need to. So it could be that she is finding religion, or religious teaching rather, difficult to listen to, make sense of. That is definitely in the text. There are lots and lots of religious images. So let's go through and get all the semantic field of religion here. Okay, first we've got this idea of cathedral tunes. We're thinking like organ music, very difficult, dirgy, perhaps depressing to listen to. We've also got this idea here of the seal despair. Now, the seal despair links to an idea of judgment that you may or may not be familiar with, okay? This is from a book in the Bible where the Apostle John has a revelation from God, and he's on a mountain on an island, I think, and he has this revelation where God is saying, this is how I'm going to end the world, and every time a seal is opened, I'm just going to move it down, so sorry. Every time a seal is opened, John gets a vision of something bad that will happen in the future. And there are 7 seals. And so this idea that a seal despair links to this idea of judgment, maybe that's tying in with the idea of death. Maybe that's tying in with the idea of hell as well. Because that's something that she must fear, being surrounded by a religious group. What else have we got that's sort of religious imagery? Well, I said this could relate to God, imperial, centres of the air. So all of these things, again, link to this idea, this semantic field of religion. Let's add that in, okay? Put it there. What's the semantic field? It's a group of words that are linked together by a common concept or idea. So semantic field of suffering, injury, death, blood. These are all words that link together to that semantic field of injury. Semantic field of religion, we would probably use some of these ideas here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this just to show that that's what I'm talking about. Okay. So that's one reading of the text. That is not the read. That ties in perfectly with this idea here, religious conflict. And I think that is a pretty solid reading of the text. But the more I read it, the more I think it's linking in with this idea of inner conflict. Emily Dickinson was a very clever woman, and her poetry operates on a different level. It kind of seems simple, but it's actually really deep when you think about it, and very complex to work out as well. This is a different reading, and you don't have to agree. I think she is struggling to process complex thoughts and ideas. It oppresses her. It makes her feel oppressed, that she cannot, when she tries to sort of wrap her head around complex thoughts and ideas, it seems to disappear. And this ties in with what we were saying down here about her being obsessed with death and this idea of almost dying. It's like I've almost got a hold of something and then it just disappears and leaves me. I'm almost going to have this experience of dying and then it just leaves me and I'm still alive. One of her poems is called "It Was Not Death, for I Stood Up." And it's like a sort of really, really strange poem, but it's about not being able to put your finger on a feeling that you're having. And so maybe she's struggling to process complex thoughts and ideas. It oppresses her. Perhaps she's got a kind of a depressive spirit. Maybe she's thinking about like really low, dark emotions, but she can't put her finger on why. And we've all been there. Someone asks you, what's wrong with you? Come on, just, plaster a smile on your face. Why do you look so sad all the time? And you just think, you know what? I couldn't tell you even if I wanted to. I can't put it into words. It's just evading me right now. I don't know how to describe it. So perhaps she has these deep depressive states, dark emotions. We would probably say, she's clinically depressed or bipolar or something today. But maybe she just can't find the words to communicate with this. Okay. So I want us to read it again, and we're just going to go through some of the language and structural choices that she's using here, because I think this poem is quite a clever poem. I think she's alluding to things all the way through this poem, but then she's pulling it away from us at the last minute. She's almost giving you the story of the poem, and then she's pulling it away. And then she almost gives you another clue about how she's feeling, and then she just pulls it away straight away. And that ties in to this idea of inner conflict, that she can't quite put her finger on how she's feeling. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons. She's distracted. She's looking at the light, and then she notices it's winter. And this is in parentheses. Look at these parenthetic clause here. So she's almost like getting distracted, and she's distracting her reader. Okay, this idea that she's trying to get you to understand, and then she stops and distracts you. Because this makes sense to me. There's a certain slant of light that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. We don't even need that line in there. It makes sense without it. That's why it's in parentheses. So this constant digression seems to be giving us that experience that Dickinson is having herself. Okay, so she's giving, this is the effect, she's giving her reader the same experience as she herself is feeling. I'm going to highlight that all in yellow. I always feel when you have a structural device, a really clever structural device here, it's to create an experience for your reader. Okay, language techniques tend to create a picture, whereas structural techniques give you an experience. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Now, all the way through the poem, we've got it, down at the bottom here. When it comes, when it goes. You have to keep remembering what that it is to make sense of this poem. When the certain slant of light, when the light, when the light, when the light. You need to keep saying that to yourself, otherwise you're going to get lost. Heavenly hurt it gives us. So light gives us heavenly hurt. We've got this lovely oxymoron here, this conflict. How can something from heaven be there to hurt you? Well, this is part of what she's saying. I try to get my head around it, but I can't. The light gives me heavenly hurt. We can find no scar. Again, we've got this idea, we're getting this sort of semantic field of injury and suffering here. So it's not a tangible thing, linking into the idea of the depressive mood that she's having. We can find no scar. That is direct proof for that, because sometimes you feel hurt inside, but it's not because someone has come over and punched you on the arm. You just feel down, you just feel low. Okay, but internal difference where the meanings are. So this is what's causing her pain, the fact that she's got pain trying to work out maybe the meaning of life, maybe the meaning behind her depressive mood. Okay, she's struggling to comprehend what it's about. None may teach it. Okay, so it again is the light. Nobody may teach us about the light. And then just adds this random any in. I'm not really sure why that's there. Any. Why would anybody teach you about the light? This is the part of the struggle. 'Tis the seal despair. The light is the seal despair. This word seal, if we don't take this idea that it's about judgment, maybe we're kind of feeling like, yeah, maybe it's about judgment, or maybe I'm not convinced about that. A seal, to be sealed up, is to be prevented. Maybe she's thinking that she's prevented from talking. You know, you seal yourself away in your bedroom when you're feeling down. You stop talking when your friends won't stop asking you, oh, what's wrong, tell me. You just stop talking to them. Okay, so 'tis the seal of despair almost. And like I said to you, she's reducing the words. And so she's just taken out that word of. 'Tis the seal of despair. 'Tis the seal despair. An imperial affliction, centres of the air. So something's happened to her. She's still not too sure what it is, but it's made her feel this idea of despair. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. Now, leaving aside this final simile, and this is the last little bit that we're going to do some work on, because we've already talked for so long. I've talked for so long. The landscape listens. First thing to say about this is, obviously this is personified. She would have been very informed and influenced by romantic poets. So we've got that link to nature. The landscape, it might even be in her own mind, the landscape in her mind. The idea that she's being somehow awakened by this idea of the feeling when it comes, when the light comes. But notice here, we've got this beautiful antithetical parallelism going, when it comes, the landscape listens. When it goes, 'tis like the distance. So shadows hold their breath. Something positive is happening when it comes. But when it goes, it leaves this darkness. Let's get this word down before we write anything else. So I want you to kind of note down that this antithetical parallelism is doing something here. It's affecting. Okay, it's almost like creating consequences almost. Like, this is the consequence when it comes near to me, when the feeling, when the thought, when the complex emotions, when the depressive state, whatever it is, when it comes near to me, then I hold my breath, and almost like the shadows inside me start to awaken. Ironic, because they're holding their breath. Especially as she's about to talk about death. Rhyming breath with death is no accident. When it goes, 'tis like the distance. So something that is faded, something that is maybe a bit nebulous. On the look of death. And again, that wonderful rhyme there, rhyming breath with death. It's almost the climax of this poem. I've looked at this simile for so long today. 'Tis like the distance on the look of death. And I can't really wrap my brain about it. But again, I think that's her giving me this experience, like we put up the top here. Giving me this experience that she herself is feeling. I can almost wrap my brain about it, but I can't. It keeps evading me. It keeps running away from me. When I think I've got a hold of this poem, I don't know if I quite have, and that's the feeling that I've had all day. But I think that's completely intentional. Rhyming breath with death. Again, we end with this final dash. No closure. This could be positive or negative, of course. It could be that, oh, now that feeling is gone and I'm feeling great. Or the dash could be, oh, it's all over for me, I've given up, sort of thing. So we can read into these sorts of things within reason, sort of however we like, because this poem is so sparse that you have the freedom to be able to do that. So what quickly then are the messages that she brings out of this poem? I would say really quickly then, it's sort of external. There are external references here. The winter afternoons, the cathedral that she's thinking about, the light that she's observing. External and natural conditions induce mental oppression. So whatever she sees has obviously induced this mental oppression that she feels suffering as a result of. We've also got a message that inner conflict happens when you think about mortality. And thirdly, I would put, lastly, things that are difficult to grasp sometimes evade understanding, like this poem. You know, don't worry if you don't get it. I think that's kind of the idea behind this. So I hope you found that interesting and useful. And I hope that you've left enough room for the next poem that we will look at as well, The Man He Killed. Thank you.